so now we're talking about some things that he has when it comes to Christianity, some objections, and he's talking about, you know, textual criticism and Bart Ehrman's view and stuff like this.
So I just understand, you're appealing to Bart Ehrman selectively, because if you're appealing to Ehrman, then you would not have become a Muslim, right?
Before we continue, please make sure you have subscribed. Also, hit the like button now and leave your comments. It helps us improve our YouTube algorithm, so that YouTube will recommend this video more. Please do it now, don't delay. These simple things help this ministry grow. Thank you, and God bless you.
It's not that I'm just like trying to follow him as like a cult leader or something. I'm just seeing what he has to say on the Bible and everything.
Okay, but even with Ehrman, if you're following him, even as an agnostic atheist, his conclusion is, because I have his books, I quote him, I've done sessions on what he claims as an historian you can objectively know. And he claims that it is a fact that Christ was killed. This is in his book, How Jesus Became God. I have it with me. And he says it's a fact that Jesus's followers, and he mentions Mary Magdalene and Peter, just two. He mentions them. They had visions that convinced them God raised Jesus physically to heaven and Jesus reigns as God. So if you follow Bart Ehrman's conclusions as quote unquote an objective historian, you don't get Islam. So why did you become Muslim?
I heard someone explain it to me this way, that since the Quran says that it was made to look like Jesus was crucified, you know, and that, you know, you see someone being crucified and you write it down as they're being crucified.
So but the Quran says Jesus' followers are Muslims. So if Peter was convinced God raised Jesus from the dead, that means Peter was convinced God killed Jesus, and now he's alive as God. So how do you square that off with the Quran? If the Quran is right, are you saying Allah deceived Peter into thinking Jesus was killed and was raised and now reigns as God?
He saw it, yeah, Peter saw it as he was being killed and raised.
Yeah,
but
no Muslim will agree with you. A Muslim will say you're now an unbeliever because according to chapter 3, verse 52, and chapter 5, verse 111 of the Quran, Jesus' followers were Muslims. For you to say Peter, who's supposedly a Muslim, was convinced Jesus was killed and now raised physically and he reigns as God, you just blaspheme the Quran.
Not exactly.
No, read chapter 3, verse 52. Yes, exactly. It's in your Quran. Read it. Chapter 3.
It's because Muslim, you know, we all know Muslim means submission, one who submits to God.
How do we know that?
What?
How do we know that? Because you said we all know that. How do we all know that?
I mean, y'all are apologists against Islam, especially.
No, how do we know that? Because you spoke on behalf of all of us. So you, who've been a Muslim for 3 weeks, you're educating us. So how do we know that? Educate me, because you've been only a Muslim for 3 weeks. So educate me. How do we know
what
that?
the Arabic word means is Muslim.
How do you know that what it means? Do you speak Arabic?
No, but if you're taught what a word means and you're taught the definition of it, then to repeat
By
it.
Who taught you that definition? Because see, you went with what certain people tell you and you took their word as gospel truth. But then you made a judgment call and rejected the claims of others as false. So by what criterion do you use to determine something's true or not?
I didn't see anyone rejecting that's what Muslim meant. But I feel like this is going a bit off topic, away from...
No, we're coming back to the apostles, which you claim. So now I want you to quote to me any Quranic statement or hadith where it says that Peter, who was a Muslim according to your Quran, was deceived into thinking Jesus was killed and raised from the dead, and he started worshiping him as God. Can you show me that in the Quran or the hadith? Because you said, yeah, Peter, it was made to look to Peter that Jesus was killed. You said that. So I want the evidence.
Yeah, but I don't believe that Peter saw him as God or worshipped him as God. I just said that it's what he saw. That's what he saw with his eyes, that he saw Jesus being crucified.
You reject Ehrman? Because you appeal to Ehrman, because that's what you said. Ehrman says that's what Peter preached. Historically, using the historical method, historical criteria, you can demonstrate the disciples like Peter, Mary Magdalene, worship Jesus as God. So are you saying now Ehrman's wrong, so we can put him aside and we can go back to the Quran?
Sure.
Okay, so just we got it on the record. He's not going to appeal to Ehrman anymore because he just rejected
I can
Ehrman's.
still agree with what some of he says about, because he's a scholar on the textual criticism.
He's also someone who's done historical inquiry on what the first Christians taught. And the reason why he's a textual critic is because textual criticism leads him to know what the text says in order to make inferences on what happened historically. So can we agree we're not going to quote Ehrman anymore, so we can put him aside? Yes, sir. So because I'm going by your authorities. I'm using Ehrman because he's an authority for you. He's not an authority for me. But if you agree, forget Ehrman. He's full of it. Let's put him aside. Let's go to your Quran. I'm
Sure.
just trying to meet you where you're at.
All right, sure.
Okay, so we agree now. Forget Ehrman. Ehrman, forget about him. He's on cloud 9 somewhere. Maybe he's doing too much shrooms. Okay.
All right.
So coming back to the Quran, no, I'm just being honest because I'm going by what you're telling me, right? You told me he's appealing to Ehrman, so I'm going by Ehrman.
Yeah.
So now we can agree, forget Ehrman. All right, I agree. Let's forget Ehrman. So as a Muslim, when you studied the Quran, what led you to accept the Quran as true over against the Bible? I'm just curious. What is it about the message of the Quran about Jesus that made you think that it has the right message of Jesus?
I accepted the Quran as the literal, word of God, because I've seen some the linguistic miracles. Some they've
How
showed.
would you know it's a linguistic miracle when you don't know the language?
They've demonstrated to me the words and how the sentence is structured.
And if I were to demonstrate to you that the Quran is full of grammatical errors and ambiguities, how would you then determine I'm right or wrong when you don't know the language?
I think about what you say and just look into it and everything. Talk to others about it.
I'll get you the citations now. You were listening to a particular group of Muslim polemicists who will exaggerate the so-called miracle of the Quran, but then ignore the Quran's gross grammatical irregularities, mistakes, and scientific blunders, obviously, because they want to convince you to become a Muslim. But since you don't know Arabic, you'd have to then trust either their judgment or mine. We'll get to that point. But even if we were to argue that the Quran is a linguistic miracle, you're not arguing for divine origin. All you're arguing is that there's a spirit being that could have influenced Muhammad to write in an unusual manner, but that doesn't prove that spirit being is God. It could be Satan. So how do you know Satan didn't deceive Muhammad?
Well, because he was pretty victorious throughout.
Victorious how? By the sword, by subjugating people and raping women and prostituting them, according to the Quran and the Sunnah, and that you consider a victory?
I was referring to, the kind of, military, how it got rid of pagan Arabia. And
he got rid of what? How do you know he got rid of pagan Arabia when Islam is steeped in paganism? For example, one of the practices that you're supposed to do if you're a Sunni and not a Quran-only Muslim, because if you're a Quran-only Muslim, that's going to be more problematic. As a Sunni Muslim, if you can afford it once in your life, you have to travel to Mecca, perform the rites, and then kiss and touch the black stone. Why do you do that?
So the view on that, I've heard it said like this before, and the explanation to me was always that this is how they always did it way back when.
Back when? Where?
Like Abraham, Ishmael.
What proof do you have historically, archaeologically, before Islam that Ishmael settled in Mecca? Can you give me pre-Islamic, textual, historical, archaeological proof, independent of later Muslim traditions that say Ishmael lived in Mecca, Abraham visited him, and then enshrined a black stone for you to smother?
It's claimed by the Quran, but other than that, no.
No, there's nothing in the Quran that says that. In fact, here I'm going to make a challenge out of love. Show me a single verse in the Quran where it says that the house that Abraham Ishmael built is in Mecca in Arabia. It's not in the Quran.
All right.
So where did you get this from? You got it from traditions that came
supposedly over 100 years after the reported death of Muhammad, because even then, you don't even know when Muhammad was born or died, because the Quran doesn't tell you.
And the sources that tell you that are over 100 years from the time of Muhammad. In other words, if I asked you what year Muhammad is born, and I say, show me the verse in the Quran, you can't show me that. The name Muhammad only appears 4 times. And then there's a reference to Ahmed. Outside of the Quran is where you get information about who this Muhammad is. If you stay within the Quran, you can't tell me who Muhammad is and where the Quran was situated, because there's nothing in the Quran that gives you a clear historical context to the so-called revelation. So if I ask you what year Muhammad was born, where would you get that information from?
From, what I've been told, by historians, or what they say. And
what historians?
I mean, I don't know any specifically, but all I've heard about his date, I don't hear any conflicting views on his date. And that
you want to bet?
70.
You have the same type of scholarship that you've been appealing to, that say that the historical Muhammad is nothing like the later mythical Muhammad, and people are now even questioning whether Muhammad existed. So you're new to this. You have people who are not Muslims who say that if you examine the earliest sources, you don't get the mythical Muhammad of later Islamic tradition. Muhammad may have been a general, no more no less, and as time evolved, they turned him into this prophetic figure and attribute to him supernatural powers, none of which can be proven historically or Quranically. In other words, if you were to apply your method and your skepticism toward the Gospels, you would argue yourself outside of Islam and you'd become an agnostic atheist or maybe a Buddhist, but you would definitely not become a Muslim.